Hello, you lads, you lovelies, you everyone in between. So, thanks for coming back to JameJame's VR, or welcome if this is your first visit, statistically likely. Well, okay, in this video, it's long overdue, but I am going to talk about the bHaptics gear. Specifically, I am talking about the Vest, Arms, and the Face, the TactVisor specifically, not the older one. I don't have that one. It was out of stock by the time I even got into bHaptics gear. We have the newer one, the TactVisor, which is by all accounts, from people who've tried both, vastly superior anyway. So one of the things that is immediately a concern with a device like any of the bHaptics gear is it going to work? Because let's be honest, it doesn't matter how cool it is. If it's not going to work with the games that you want to play, then it's not any good. It doesn't matter what it can do or what its features are. If it doesn't support the games or experiences that you want, it just doesn't matter how technically great it is. And I think that's a huge problem with a lot of the up and coming competitors to bHaptics. Is that while in a lot of ways you're getting some very advanced, very fancy stuff, support for them just doesn't exist at all. Let me show you what I'm talking about here, okay? Gosh, the Uwu Vest, is that how you pronounce it? I don't know. We're just gonna say Uwu Vest. Sure seems very cool. It really seems very modern, but let's see what games it actually supports. Nice, it supports Super Ho. Anyway, okay, that could be a lot worse. There's some games in there. It's not an amazing list, but it's just, I don't know. Really depends on what you're paying for this thing, doesn't it? Alright, how about the Shockwave, which actually, you know, it's a suit that actually combines haptics and full body trackers in sort of like a suit, right? So there's a convenience to the Shockwave I do like, even if it isn't particularly like super science modern in the same way that the Uwu Vest is. It does offer a lot, but one thing it does not offer a lot of is game compatibility. Here, have a look. Yeah, and these last three are still just coming soon. Large oof. Alright, well, let's have a look at what we get from bHaptics. Now, this is just Steam VR games. We're not including Quest stuff or sort of old other stuff. You know, this is just PC VR stuff, since all I really do is PC VR here. This is just PC VR games. Alright, let's have a scroll. And there we go, down to the bottom. That is a lot more games. A lot more. So what do you think? The fact is that most games, when they come out, someone will mod in bHaptic support. If they don't have native support, it'll be modded in possibly the same day. It's just that good. It's fairly easy to mod in support for bHaptics games, so the modding community is very vibrant and experienced. Honestly, support for games is so good, it's almost unusual for a game, at least the sort of games I like to play, mostly sort of action, shooty, stabby type games. It's quite unusual for them not to have support for it. There's only a tiny handful that actually don't. So that's pretty cool. And that's a huge factor with the bHaptics. I really can't stress this enough. Just because there are, it is, I guess in some ways, a little bit on the primitive side. If you think about it, it really is just vibration motors in an array. It's really nothing super science there, but it always works. And no one else can make that claim yet. And I'm pretty skeptical that they're going to be able to, if I'm being honest with you. So, to say it another way, even though there are more advanced suits and haptic gear coming out, I would consider them to be quite risky, and something that an enthusiast might want to check out just because they're willing to take the loss on it. But they are going to be risky, where bHaptics is pretty much a sure thing that you're going to have at least most of your games are going to work with this. Uwu, Monsieur, and Shockwave cannot make that claim, not even close. So think about that when people say, oh, but the Uwu vest, it has electrical impulses and it's going to be so much better. Yeah, well, if your game doesn't support it, then it's just a weird shirt. You know, you can get weird shirt for much cheaper. It's game support that matters on a piece of hardware like that, and they have a long way to go before it's anywhere worth the cost of that device. They might get there, and honestly, I hope they do, but I don't know if I'm wanting to risk it myself. We'll see. It depends. You never know what happens in the future. But for now, bHaptics is a safe bet, and it's not going anywhere. All right, so here's the next thing that I think when we're talking about any sort of fairly expensive stuff, and bHaptics gear is not really super cheap. And if you're going to spend the money, you need to be pretty confident about what you're getting. And you're going to make sure you're going to get the use out of it. That's the thing. Like, that's the question. If you can spend, in my case, something like 1,200 Canadian dollars on haptic gear, is really not worth it if I don't use it. And this is why in some ways it's pretty good that I've had this gear for so long before doing a review, because I still use it every day. Every chance I can, I throw on my gear. And I've had these for many, many, many months now. So the fact that that shine has not worn off after all this time is a very good sign. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the same experience. Who is this for is very relevant. And I'm going to say it is for VR enthusiasts. That price alone should keep the casuals out. Sorry guys, that's not meant to be a jab or anything. But unless you use a lot of VR, unless you're really into this kind of stuff, it's going to be very expensive and maybe not something you're going to get the value out of. On the other hand, if you are a hardcore VR nerd, I think you're crazy not to have this. But even within there, if your primary games you like to play are things like shooters, like sort of first-person shooter games, any shooting game after the fall contractors, stabbing games like Blade and Sorcery, or Hellsplit Arena. Hellsplit Arena has fantastic bHaptic support actually, and Blade and Sorcery not so much, if you want the honest truth. It used to have really good support, but then they made it native and they just did a terrible job of it. As far as I can tell, they just didn't get any of it right. I don't know why, but Hellsplit Arena, top notch. Generally speaking, I think if you like to play a lot of action type games, shooting, stabbing type games, lots of those are awesome for the bHaptics suite in general. Games that are not so great for this would be sim games. And frankly, I sort of think that if you're a simmer looking for next level immersion, I don't think this is the right place for you to be looking. And most of the people who are hardcore simmers that I know would rather get like chairs and things like a Yatu or whatever the F that is. They were all talking about that. I don't know. But they all seem to think it was really cool. And that sort of thing. So I think Simmer's money is better spent elsewhere, because I don't know any sim game that has native support for it. And I will talk about audio to haptic a little bit later, but it is a very much reduced experience. So this also applies to like race car games. There might be a few. I do know a handful of flight sim type games that are more arcadey that actually do support it, but things like DCS, Microsoft Flight Simulator, any of those sort of class of games, that racing game that people play. There's like a couple of racing games that I don't even remember what they're called. I don't play them, but none of the big ones, none of those big hardcore racing sims have any support for bHaptics at all. So guys, it's not probably the right choice for you. But on the other hand, if you like to shoot and stab things a lot, then this is a very cool piece of equipment that you will get a lot of use at. But that is important to note, because I have had some people ask me, hey, is this going to be any fun? Because it simulates like an engine rumble. And the answer is it kind of technically can, but I don't think it's worth the money. Because these aren't cheap. And you'd be better off getting something better. I know that there's some wildly, fantastically cool stuff for simmers out there. You need to be looking into that stuff. This is really not the right tool for that job. Another thing I should say is VR chatters. VR chatters love VRChat. And I'm very much a weekend warrior of the VRChat world. I absolutely love VRChat, even though I take a shit ton of abuse in it. You know. But I still have an amazing time in VRChat, and I've spent a lot of money on that VRChat experience. And the bHaptics actually does have very solid support for VRChat. And in fact, I have just a previous video, I talk about getting decent performance levels in VRChat using the bHaptics gear. And if you're interested, if you're a VR chatter and you're thinking, geez, I think this might be fun, I think it is, with some caveats that it's quite heavy and it can be bulky. I'm gonna show you a little video I made from VRChat where I talk about some of that stuff. Just a quick little preview, a little show off. And then I'm going to talk about the individual pieces of equipment in more detail. Hi there, guys. So I wanted to just show off some of the VRChat options for the bHaptics stuff. Since there's some stuff to it, I did make a tutorial video talking about some of it. But I'm actually using kind of all of it here. That is the arms, the vest, and the facial interface. And I've actually only got my performance just at medium, so it's still actually pretty good. I mean, that depends on the avatar you're starting with. This one started out as good, and it only went up a level, and that is with support for all this stuff. Although it is reduced, of course. Out of the box, it just comes with everything flipped on, and that's going to set your avatar way down to very poor, even if you started with an excellent avatar. It's a bit of a pain in the butt, but there's ways to do it. I do have that tutorial video you can check out, but I did want to just sort of show off some of this stuff, and I think it's pretty cool. So I just want to show it off again to demonstrate that you can still have something like even a good or medium performance avatar with all the bHaptics goodies still going. I think that's very cool. And just to show it off though, for example, you can see there the activation centers for the arm. So it's only 2 per arm. You could have all of them. It depends on how you set it up. I'm okay with not all of them going off. It's just fine. I think it's fine. Anyway, so let's show this off a little bit. So you can see the sensors going on my face. Isn't that cool? And I already showed off the arms. And of course, the vest. So not all of the chest and back also goes. I can't. Well, can I? Yeah, a little bit. But you can see you can reduce the number. You can still have enough that you'll feel it. It'll feel pretty good. It won't feel like there's huge gaps. Honestly, it's pretty good. And anyway, that was just to show off that in VRChat, you totally can have all of this stuff working. And I think it's actually pretty fun. I almost always do put on all my bHaptics gear when I go into VRChat. You can get a little warm, but that's what air conditioning and having a fan running on you are for. Anyway, that's all this is. Just a quick thing. Since we're talking about bHaptics, we should show off that it's actually, I think, pretty fun in VRChat. Although, ladies out there, or how do you say this in the modern way? I'm not an expert on this. I know some of you might think I would be. I'm not. I'm a trucker for fuck's sakes. But my point is, if you've got breasts, some moderation on your part's probably gonna be a good idea. Wear a thick padded bra, trust me on this one. You will get molested. I mean, it's not gonna be terrible, don't worry. But I think you get what I'm saying, right? Because, right, people are gonna go right for it as soon as they figure out that you've got bHaptics on, right? And it's worth it if your avatar's like a little jiggly. Whatever. It's all part of the experience. But still, I love having bHaptics in VRChat. I think it's awesome. I think it's a lot of fun. You can see on my avatar, it actually has... I just have the arms showing. Because I think they look pretty cool still, actually. And then just for everything else, I just have the activation highlights. I think that's a pretty good compromise without ruining the styling. Although you can have it show the actual bHaptics gear on your avatar. Other than, you know, just the arms, whatever. You can add and remove them. It's pretty cool. Anyway, that's it for VRChat. Now let's get back to talking about some other stuff. Okay, bye-bye. So yeah, that's some fun VRChat stuff. If you're just a VR chatter, then I don't know. I gotta tell you, because you're not getting physical feedback that feels like touch. In the violence of a video game, it's really not that noticeable. Your imagination will go along with it. And for bHaptics, it might do that too, but I definitely notice it feels more like a vibration than it does like somebody touching your arm or something, or something else they might do to you. But it does feel more like a vibration. So if somebody wants to give you a hug or something, it doesn't feel like you're getting hugged. It just feels like you're getting vibrated. Right? So that is something to take into account for VRChat. And where something like the Ooh vest for VR chatters might begin to make more sense over something like the X40 or X16 bHaptics vests. So we want to take that into account, that these are still fairly primitive devices, and in the context of just blasting and shooting things and getting shot by stuff, I think they're extremely good. But for social VR, it's kind of up to you, to your imagination and your experiences and how your own brain works and how that stuff kind of goes for you if you're going to get value out of it. And I would definitely say if you're really a hardcore VR chatter and most other stuff is very secondary, then I wouldn't strongly recommend any of the bHaptics gear there at all, and certainly nothing other than the vest. And even then, I'd only go for like maybe an X16 and definitely not an X40 for just that. If it's just for VR chat, that is the only thing you want to use, then I would consider is getting the X16. I would not get the expensive X40 or any of the other stuff. I don't think you need it just for that, because the physical detail you get from feedback is great for simulating recoil of a gun or maybe a sword slash, but of anything more social or tender, it does not do. So keep that in mind when it comes to VR chat. There are limitations for it. So what I really recommend is to people whose primary thing is still shooting, blasting machine guns and hand grenades, but who also like to spend some time in VR chat. Then it starts to become a lot of fun and actually very much worth it. And that's the category I'm in. And I think if you're in that same category, then this is actually pretty fun. All right, let's move on. All right. Let's talk about the vest. I have the X40, but there's also the X16. Now, I think most people's interpretation of which one to get is mainly like a financial one. You're going to look at the X40 and be like, oh, it's expensive, maybe a little cheaper. But in reality, I would encourage you to view these devices with a little bit more nuance, actually. Because there are some significant differences between these vests that for the right person, the X16 is going to be something they would much prefer. Right off the bat, I'll say that the X40 is surprisingly heavy. It is very nearly, actually it is a little bit over 4 pounds. That's not a huge amount if you're like a fairly husky fella. But I'll tell you, even me as a bit of an ogress, I notice its weight. I do notice it. It doesn't impede me in any way, but I do notice that it's kind of heavy. I sort of am used to it, and for a lot of games, wearing a vest just sort of feels like part of the gear you'd be wearing anyway. But the weight's there, and the X16 is almost half as heavy. It's just a little over 2 pounds. So that may be a factor. Another factor is that the X16 is quite a bit shorter. Now, I'm often quite shy about my height. I am very tall. I stand out everywhere I go. And I hate that. But the X40 is very well sized for me. But these vests have some adjustment in terms of length. And that's really actually quite important. For when I'm playing most games, most shooting take games, I would wear it long. I would wear it in the long mode. I'm going to actually show you what I'm talking about here. So here's my super cool X40. Now, you see these snaps. That's how you adjust the length. Now, for most games, like shooting games, I want this long because I am so tall and I have a crazy long torso. But there are times I would want it shorter, and you can just snap these like so, and it's quite a bit shorter. Quite a bit. That's the amount of length shorter here. Like that, see? So it gets shorter by that much. And this is actually quite useful because I like the better coverage if I'm playing most games. However, if I'm playing something like VRChat or using my Catwalk C2 Plus, I actually want the vest to be a little bit short because I'm going to have stuff around my waist. I'm going to have my hip tracker or the belt on the Catwalk C2. In which case I do not want the motors and the surrounding electronics to get crushed by the big belt on the Catwalk C2, for example. Or to just be impeded, you know, having my tracking messed up by the length of the vest or have to wear it over the vest, which is a bit awkward and doesn't work that well. So it's nice to have some flexibility in its length. Now, here's the thing though. If you are somewhat more reasonably sized, this still might be too long for you. Take a look at the specs on the length of these pages and figure out where this sort of equipment and where your hip tracker might be if that's going to be relevant for you. Or if you're going to be sitting down a lot, you want to make sure that you can flex and move properly. And the fact is the X16 just might fit a lot of people better. And it still has enough sensors that I don't think you'll really be missing out that much. It sounds like a huge difference between 40 to 16, but I think that you have to take into account the whole package. That if you find something like the X40 to be uncomfortable or heavy or awkward or restrictive in your movement, you won't like it and you won't use it. So I would definitely suggest taking a good solid look at the S16, at least talk with the specs and think about it and see how long they are and how well that's going to conform to your body shape, and if that weight is going to become an irritant or not. I could see it happening. I know when I'm in VRChat for a couple of hours or something, or playing a game for a little while, I don't have problems with the weight of the X40. But when I take it off, I'm like, oh wow, that's so much better without this thing on, right? Like, it's when you notice the absence, you're like, oof, that actually was quite heavy. I'm glad I'm done playing games for now. On the S16, that's not really going to be nearly as much as an issue. It's something to take into account. Is do not discount the X16 as just a shittier, cheaper version of the X40. There are some very legitimate reasons why you might want to get an X16 instead of an X40, least of all being that it's much, much cheaper. The X40 is very expensive. And with all these things, you have to make sure you're going to get that much usage out of it. And having something that is more comfortable will enable you to get more usage out of it. So that's sort of my thoughts when it comes to either of the sort of the tax suits, I guess is their official name, even though they're really vests, aren't they? But when it comes to either of those, I think that your body shape and how it's going to fit your torso length and your ability to deal with weight is going to be really actually the best way for you to decide which one of these to fit. Because both of them are going to be a ton of fun to use. But unless, of course, you find it uncomfortable. But that's my suggestion. Make your purchasing decision based on comfort and fit, not necessarily features. Because I guarantee you that even though the X16 has quite a bit less vibration motors on it, you'll still get all the sensations and stuff that you really would be important to you. Even if it's not quite as fine-grained, it's not quite as detailed, and probably doesn't handle like a slashing motion as well, you will still get it. And that's probably good enough. And again, it's much cheaper, and it has longer battery life, and it's almost half as much in terms of weight. So just think about it. That's my advice. All right. Another couple things is that you can still customize these things. I know for my purposes, it didn't quite knock it out of the park. It was actually perfectly fine until I got the catwalk. And then I found, I wish it had, of all things, molly straps or more pockets or something. Where's my webbing? I was like, I'm wearing this, what is a combat vest, a virtual combat vest, but there's no pockets. Where am I going to put my grenades? Wherever shall I stuff my spare magazines? How did they not think of this? Not to mention, if you're on a catwalk, the problem with that is it's so hard to get in and out of it. You have to really buckle yourself in, because the last thing you want to do is go flinging off your catwalk, right? So you buckle in there very tight. You have to feel very secure and safe to use this thing, trust me. And you are, but it's not a quick process. So I thought, boy, I'd like to have a couple of things to help with that. So let's show you off. Just a couple of little tweaks. Easy stuff, not big deals. First off, this is a little pouch for a water bottle. I can stick in a big water bottle there. You'd think under the armor would get in the way occasionally. It just doesn't. I don't know. I've just never had this actually be in my way. And then it just squishes over when you're not using it. It's just never been a problem, and I get to have water on me at all times. Again, if you're strapped into something like a catwalk C2, you are not getting in and out of this quickly, which means when you get thirsty, you're probably just going to want to put up with it, which is stupid if you're sweating. Don't be stupid. That said, this is just held on by a couple of mollies I ran through the little side strap. It's really not, there's nothing involved in this. This one is, I made this out of just parts. I repurposed parts like you wouldn't believe. This is just scissored off of some other tactical vest I had and hated. Don't ask why I have tactical vests. And it's just a little pouch. And what this is really intended for, and this is actually velcroed on. I just used some like double-sided heavy-duty velcro tape. There's stuff rated for 10 pounds, more than strong enough. And then I can stick a battery in here, because the idea was that I would be using my Pimax crystal wirelessly. And you're going to need a big battery to make that seem realistic, I'll tell you what. And I'm hoping I was hoping at the time, next month I would have a wireless. But even if you're using something like a Quest 2 and you want a larger battery, or maybe you're just going to go full gravy seal and need a place to store your Snickers bars, then something like this, a little mod, just getting some double-sided Velcro tape and just adding it on is a good idea. Doesn't have to be your final form. Also, a little fun fact, this little logo is actually just Velcro too. So you can have your own logo there. So where you can put your pay or whatever. But yeah, don't take, if you want to make tweaks to these sort of things, go ahead. It's yours after all. And especially it has to be suitable for the purpose, because you're going to be doing some hardcore gaming in this kind of stuff. It's maybe a good idea to have access to drinks or whatever you might need. And I do. I would consider one of the vests or suits to be the bare minimum. As long as you have one of those, I think you're going to be a pretty happy camper. You don't strictly need anything else. They can be awesome, but I think for a lot of people, it's pretty reasonable to just stop at the vest. I personally do love the arms though. And I'll talk about the other stuff. I'll talk about all of it. But just for now, I would consider the vest to be the absolute core requirement. If you get only one thing, it must be the vest. For sure. Doesn't even matter which one. But the vest is the core component of a bHaptics setup. So if you're interested in haptics, that's the one thing you for sure must get. And then if you want to get more stuff later on, that's fine. And that's really kind of all I really have to say about the vest. Like, it is just motors. It does not simulate feeling. It doesn't do texture or anything like that. It won't hurt you. You know, it can simulate motion very well, though. If you ever watched any of my Subnautica playthroughs, you can tell I'm frequently upset by the feeling of water running against me, especially my back in my X40. I find that very upsetting. I know it's doofy, but that made just my dislike of being underwater so much worse. Just feeling the water currents and stuff on me. Oh, I found it very upsetting. And it did a really good job of that. And then for other games, just impacts and blasts and firearms are especially great. Are really very good. But when it comes to haptic stuff like this in general, I think it's important to understand just what it is you're getting. Which is to say, it is just a vibration. If you're somebody whose mind is constantly trying to break out of the game, you might just feel this as just vibration. If you have the sort of brain that likes to play along, that gets to just be involved and be like, yeah, okay, I know sort of logically that this is just a vibration, but I'm going to play along with it. I'm going to get inside of the game as much as I can, then I think these are great devices. I do know some people who constantly want to just break out of the fact that they're in virtual reality. Some people's brain is just not made for fun. And if your brain's not made for fun, then I'm not really sure you're going to love this device, because it can't super accurately simulate all that much. I think it adds enough of a really good, solid, strong nudge to really push you in the direction of really fantastic immersion. I certainly find that to be the case. My brain just plays right along with whatever's happening. And I think that's really how you have to view haptic gear like this. It is not going to simulate reality. It's just going to give you a strong push. And your own brain, your own imagination still has to do work here. Just like with any other piece of VR equipment. You have to be prepared to play along and allow yourself to be immersed in that experience. bHaptics helps a lot with that. But this is not some kind of magic full dive technology. Okay? Because we don't have that. And when we do, it will be made by somebody terrible we should not trust. Take that into account. You know what you're like. And if you know that if you struggle to be immersed in VR all the time, and you sort of have just these specific setups and just these things you like to do for it, but you're always sort of hyper aware of the fact that you're just in virtual reality, I don't think you'll benefit as much from this as somebody with a more cooperative sort of imagination. And I think that's just important when it comes to this sort of thing in general. And it's obviously important for VR in general as well. But for this, I think it's quite especially important, because this can only do so much. You will have to help it along. Now, let's move on to the arms. These are the arms. Now, pretty cool, actually. I really like the arms. But there's a couple of things here I do need to point out, just so you know what you're getting into. The arms are much more simple than Ether Vest. You know, the webpage kind of says it's got 12 haptic motors for precision, so 6 per arm, which is fine, but this is not precision. This is not a precision piece of equipment. Not at all. You got motors in the control box, here, and then here, and there's just sort of 2 per segment. It's 2x3. This is not a precision piece of equipment. It is, however, really good for simulating things like recoil or impacts. That's where. Now, it can't be real recoil. Remember, I'm saying simulated. We're simulated stuff, right? It's virtual reality. It's not the real thing. We can't do that yet. And although certain things like a Pro Tube can exist to generate something closer to recoil, that's its own can of worms. And this, however, is easy, well supported, and actually a heck of a lot of fun. This makes like one of my favorite things is the LMG in After the Fall with these arms. That is a very chonky LMG. Jamie likes a chonky gun. Daka. That's my thing. So much more satisfying with these. A lot of games. Hellsplit Arena has really good, actually exceptionally good haptic support. It's so good in that game for some reason. Odd, because in Blade and Sorcery, it was good when it was a mod, and then they added native support, and then they ruined it. It's there, it technically works, you'll never notice it. It stinks, they broke it. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe someday they'll update the mod and bring that back, but it sucks now. I don't know what to tell you. I actually recorded, because I have my little B-roll in the back here, I had to get rid of it. I took a whole bunch, I did some bunch of Blade and Sorcery stuff, but it just barely triggers ever. So that really irritated me. But that's about Blade and Sorcery, not these. Now, a couple of things where these can go wrong, though. There's a reason I'm not being like, yes, immediately buy these, even though I love them. And the only time I don't strap these guys on is, well, assuming it's supported, I'll get to that in a moment, is if I'm playing a seated-based game where I'm using like a controller or something, then it's not really worth it. For like when I play Subnautica is a good example. Subnautica supports these, not really worth it. Not if you're using this seated sort of gameplay mode. Maybe when the full motion controls are out, then I would start strapping these on. But for a lot of games like that, no. But the trick with these guys is sometimes the fit does not agree with everyone. I've said this a whole lot about the vest. If you don't find it comfortable, you're not going to wear it, and you're not going to have fun, and you're going to be angry, and these are not cheap. Here's the thing, okay? Most of the pictures will show it being like worn quite high. There we are. I actually don't find that comfortable up there. I like to wear mine on the wrists. That's where I like them. And that is how you wear these. You wear the arms where you find them comfortable. Doesn't matter what the little bHaptics dummy guy, the mannequin, is wearing it, or what anything you see in their pictures, forget it. None of it matters. You put these where they are comfortable, and that is the final word of it. That is it. And make sure you do that. And when it comes to comfort, that's the thing, is I've known a few people, not many, but I have known a few who ended up selling these because they couldn't get a comfortable fit. I find that surprising, but we're all made of different meat, and some people's meat is apparently very sensitive. Big bummer for them, because I absolutely love these. I would have so much less fun without that chonky machine gun recoil on these things, or, you know, shield bashing somebody. Just so much. I love the arms. It'd be so disappointing and so heartbreaking if you couldn't get them to be comfortable. So here's what I think something you should definitely do is, 1, wear them wherever they're comfortable, doesn't matter where. Find a place they're comfortable. And then 2, pay attention to how they are fit. Again, its rotation does not matter, really. There's only 6 motors in this, so the rotation on your arm just does not matter. Not really. Again, there's no precision in here at all. It doesn't. Just wear it where it's comfortable. You'll be fine. Trust me, okay? And Pay attention that your arm is not a straight pipe, is it? Probably not. It's not like an early PlayStation 2 game where your arms are pipes. Your arm is curved a bit. It narrows at the wrist and it extends outward at the elbow. So pay attention when you're putting it on to make sure that you take that into account. If you just wear it straight across, it's likely to be loose at your wrist and then tight as it goes toward the elbow. So don't wear it like that. Wear it like this. You can see that it's not level, so it's consistently held across wherever you've decided to wear it. Take that into account. Get it to fit nicely, to be snug so it stays on and won't move around, but not that it's pinching anywhere uncomfortably either. You want even, consistent pressure on this. And that's, I would say, my tips about wearing this. Is just wear it wherever it's comfortable and make sure that you have a nice even pressure on it and you're not getting pinched anywhere, because that will eventually become uncomfortable and that will suck, and then you won't have any fun, and then you spend a lot of money and you won't have fun with it and you'll be pissy, and rightly so. So let's not let that happen. That said, if you just cannot get this to be comfortable, you're in a fairly small minority. Like I said, I know very few people who actually have a problem with the arms. And I think there's got to be some way you can figure out how to get these comfortable. And those people, I don't think, did all the diligence they could have. I refuse to think there's no way you could get this to be comfortable. You may have to rig something up. You may have to cut up a felt blanket and use that as an inner shield. There's got to be something. But if there really isn't, the good news is that this kind of stuff sells pretty easy. So at least there's that. I am not parting with mine ever. That's for sure. I absolutely love the arms. They're so good. But that said, there's a couple of drawbacks with these too. They're actually pretty heavy. Great for fitness types. But these are actually quite heavy. This is a heavy unit. You could, if you were to whip this at your buddy's head, he would be very angry at you. That's how heavy it is. Yeah, I think that's how I'm going to describe it. Also, fun little fact, this is Velcro too, so you can put your own logos. Cool. And of course, this inner lining does actually come out. Yeah, you can wash it or whatever. The Haptics is good for that. You can actually, I should have said this during the vest, but for the vests as well, you can buy a replaceable washable lining. Although I don't think you can buy a replaceable lining for these. Maybe you can get one if you contact support or something. I don't know. But something to keep in mind. You want to keep your hygiene to be a thing. Now, the compatibility with the arms. Here's a magic thing about the arms. The compatibility is very nearly the same as the vest. That's really, really good. There's only a small fraction of games that would say only support the vest. I think there's one that's like Vest and TactVisor. But almost every game that does have support for bHaptics will also support the arms. That's a big deal. So that's why I generally would say, if you can get two things, then the arms would be your number two. They're pretty expensive though. Yeah. Frankly, a lot of this niche stuff is expensive. It's just part of the experience as being a VR nerd, unfortunately, guys. Me, I do not regret a single penny I've spent on my VR on this stuff. And I'm in Canada. I get the shit hosed out of me. I pay an insane amount of taxes. My conversion rates, everything is terrible. And then they destroy me on border import fees. And all worth it. The important thing to take away from this is don't live in Canada. Compatibility is great. Everything is great. Like I said, just remember they're a little heavy. I don't think this is going to be so heavy that you would actually really have much problems with it though. But it is heavy. Yeah, I don't think you're going to struggle with the weight, but I think you will be aware of it. So that's sort of my thoughts on these. I absolutely love them. I absolutely would definitely, if you can afford these, for sure get them. Just make a note about what I said about the fit and some creativity. There's a small chance some creativity will be required to get them to have maximal comfort for you. But I'm certain there's some way to do it. When it comes to VR in general, tweaking things so that they fit, so they're comfortable for you, is just a huge thing of VR. And these are no different. Look at the ridiculous mods people do to their headsets. My AKX got everything modified. Just stuff to make these little minor comfort changes you may have to do with here. For the vest, I needed to make no changes for comfort. These, none at all either. Actually, none of the bHaptic stuff if I made a tweak for comfort. But you might. And if be at least prepared for that possibility. I don't think there's anything for you to do on the vest. It's pretty solid. It's a vest. Humans have been making vests for a while. This maybe though, because I could see some people being irritated by the sort of grippy material in here, or just having it sort of squeeze their flesh a little bit in a way they don't like. Just keep that in mind and maybe think about sort of solutions should there be a problem. And I would encourage you not to just, sell it. I would encourage you to try a couple of different things. Like I said, try a bit of felt or some soft material sort of as a blanket around it. The motors in this are very powerful. Just like the X40 vest or the S16, those are powerful motors, especially on 4X. You will feel it, I assure you. It is not going to be an issue with these. And I think that pretty much sums it up for the arms. The TactVisor for arms. That's it. Love them. I think you should get them. Okay, now the TactVisor. Let's talk a little bit about that. I'm not really going to show it off, but I'm going to say, this is what I wear on my friggin' head. Isn't that hilarious? This goes on my head. God, I'm tough as coffin nails, ain't I? But you can see the little control module here. And, the facial interface. I can't really show it off, can I? Well, there you go. Actually, yes, I can. But there is the bHaptics TactVisor. Actually on AKX, since my crystal has been sent away for RMA. It was a beta version and some of the stuff needed to be changed out. But this is on AKX. So this will fit on something as ridiculous as an AKX, and it definitely fits a little better in the crystal, but it does fit. Alright, the TactVisor is the one that in many ways I have the most to say. Because it is, in my opinion, the weakest of the three options. Let's get into that in a bit. Let's talk about what it's like. First off, it will be compatible with any headset that basically connects with Velcro. So as long as your facial foam fits with Velcro, it'll be compatible. If it isn't, and there's a couple that aren't, if your headset is not compatible, and do take a quick look, because the Index is one, I think the Quest 2 is another. If you have one of those headsets, and there's a few, you have to get a different facial interface connector from VRCover. Once you have that, you're good to go. Headsets that just use sort of Velcro normally, such as Pimax's, Vives, I believe, those just work. But take it up and make sure, if you're going to go buy one of these, do make sure, do not assume that it's going to work with your headset, unless you got a Pimax, in which case you're definitely good. But note too that the fit is better on the crystal, which is a little narrower than it is on the AKX. I made it fit anyway. It's been fine for me, not uncomfortable, but it's a bit fiddly. And, there may be a bit fiddly on your headset too, but probably not. Its compatibility, I'd say, is pretty solid. It is, however, not necessarily like the perfect facial interface for everyone, because it's quite thick, and you sort of want this so the motors don't vibrate like right into your skull. And so this would say it's good for people who like the pleather facial interfaces, and good for people who like a thicker facial interface. I have seen at least one absolute mad lad like pull his open and thin the foam out. Goodbye warranty, but alright. So yeah, I guess you can modify these for your own fit, but it's fairly extreme. I'm told it's just glued sort of together rather than stitched, and I don't see why that would ever be a problem. And in fact, it's a benefit if you end up wanting to tear this apart and modify the foam on the inside. But I would primarily say that if this is best for people who like a thicker facial interface and not somebody who's like chasing every last little degree. Next, we're going to say, compared to The vest and arms, the actual vibration feedback is very weak. It is less than a quarter. I would describe it as like a sixth as strong, and that is with everything on maximum. So you notice it, you'll feel it, but it is not going to have the same impact as the vest and arms do. It is a fairly mild effect that you're going to feel. And what I find shocking is apparently it's much more powerful than the original facial interface, the tactile, was. So how weak was that? I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. But I found the actual feedback strength of the TactVisor to be, and this is at full power at 4x. Okay. I would have wanted something more. If it was twice as powerful, it would be almost powerful enough. That's sort of it is. You do notice it, it's there, but its actual feedback power in its motors, I think is far too weak, and it's quite disappointing in that regard. It's not bad. You know what? It is bad. I changed my mind. It's bad, but it's sort of acceptable anyway, because I mean the alternative is nothing. Something that's a bit interesting is that your view will vibrate when this thing activates. And you will definitely hear it. What it lacks in physical feedback, it more than makes up for in noise. So it's quite loud, though you can mitigate this by having a little bit of fabric. I use like a piece of like rolled up microfiber, but between the motors and the sort of the plastic back part of the facial interface. And that actually dampened that vibration a lot to the point where it's not a problem anymore. But note that I had to do that, and you may too, because boy, is it loud by default. And just putting in anything in there, any little bit of foam or fabric between the motors and the headset makes a big deal to keeping that volume a bit more reasonable when they trigger. Because it is not the motors that are making the noise, it is their vibration against the plastic of your actual facial interface. So that's a relatively easy fix. As I started to say before I got sidetracked by how loud these are, by default, your view will actually vibrate. And I'm on like a heavy duty AKX, you saw that. Your screen will vibrate just a teensy amount when they trigger. Actually, I kind of like that effect. I think if somebody just beams you, if your bell got rang good and hard, a little bit of vibration is the least that would happen. Trust me. I actually do like that, but it is something noted that it will vibrate your display bit. I can't see how it could ever be a problem though, to be honest with you. And when I spoke to some other people who have the TactVisor, they actually kind of thought they actually didn't have a problem with it. They thought it was actually kind of an unintentional, desirable effect anyway, because it's not strong and it's not long. Just very, and then your view goes like that. The battery life is quite a bit shorter than the other accessories, but it's still pretty long. So the webpage advertises the Vest, well, the X40 as 12 hours, which seems about right. I think the X16 is something like 15 hours. The arms are a ridiculous 18, and then the TactVisor is only 8. That said, I don't think you're going to run into this. I've never had a run out or even come close to running out. But I think if maybe you're playing for a couple of days and you're forgetting to charge your gear, it could be something that could be annoying. It does seem to drain its power quite quickly, even when the motors aren't being activated very often, which is interesting because the vest and arms are triggering all the time when you're playing these games. And you're blasting away at a horde of Zeds. They're going off, and I run my vest at all my equipment at full power, 4x. I'm not screwing around. I'm paid for the effect, I'm getting it. But the TactVisor really doesn't go off all that often compared to the others. It's only when something hits you in the head or there's some kind of maybe explosion. So they trigger only 1/20th as much, if that. Like I said, it's very specific when the TactVisor will actually activate. When something hits your head, it makes sense, right? But still, I notice its battery life is significantly below the others, even though it's barely triggering at all and probably only triggered for 1 or 2 bursts during a typical gameplay session. Its battery life, though, is like 75%, while the other two are like at 90. So it's interesting. And worth noting that you're going to have to pretty much charge this thing on the regular, but you'll probably never actually run it out on a single play session, probably not even two. Take into account that the TactVisor is cheap. Compared to the other options, it is not much money. It is the cheapest out of all the haptic feedback options. Nonetheless, do not start with it. Get yourself a vest. This would be the one I would get last. Well, I would get it before the hands and feet, which do not have broad game support. And I would consider the TactVisor to be still a mainstream part. Like the vest, the arms, and the TactVisor, I think, are the core set of what would be like a usual person's complete package for haptics. But I would say if you're going to stop somewhere, stop at the TactVisor. Not that it's a bad thing, because the good news is it's really not that expensive. So if it's not that expensive, if you get less out of it, it's not as terrible. I like it, and in some games it's a lot of fun, but don't buy it with the understanding that it is what it is. That it's not going to trigger with the same regularity as the other haptic stuff, because it is purely reactive to the environment. So, you know, for the most part, unless you're getting shot in the head a whole lot, the TactVisor doesn't trigger all that much. You know, so take that into account. I still like it, but I recommend it really only for people who are big fans of haptic feedback, or are people who are tired of PlayStation VR2 owners bragging about their head haptics. If you fall into one of those two categories, then I think you will like the TactVisor. But I think a lot of people, it probably is very much on the edge of worth it or not. It's sort of a coin toss for you. If you've had other bHaptics equipment and are just sort of looking to complete the set, all right, you'll get something out of it. I think you will. But out of the three sort of what I would call main body of bHaptics gear, it is by far the weakest. So I do sort of recommend it, but not strongly. Like I said, I'm glad I have it. I would buy it again. Okay, so that's important to say. Now that I've owned it for a while, I would buy it again. If something happened to mine, I would buy another. But I'm a huge geek for this kind of stuff, right? So take that into account, that you probably should also be a huge geek for this kind of stuff. And if you are, then I think you're going to like the TactVisor, even with its limitations. If, however, you're much more on the casual side, or it's not really a big deal to you, then I don't think you're missing out all that much on the TactVisor. Okay, so the last little quick thing I want to talk about is if your game does not have any support for bHaptics, you're not actually out of luck. You can use the audio to haptic function. I have never really given this too much work. I played a little bit with it in No Man's Sky, which doesn't support anything. It's okay. I think it works pretty well for games for which there is no music, because music will trigger it, and that just feels weird. But audio haptic will work for Vest and Arms, and it will react to sounds in the game. And you can configure this quite finely, and with a fair amount of work, you can actually get this to work weirdly good, but never as good as just what a mod or official support can do. It is sort of a, well, it's better than nothing sort of response. And doesn't mean it's always necessarily bad, though, because, you know, explosions can trigger in different areas, where the sharp crack of guns can give feedback in different areas. It's actually quite detailed, and I think that's interesting. But as a rule, I generally don't bother with the audio to haptic feature. I would rather just try and find a mod or put up with just what I have. That said, I've occasionally had kind of fun with the audio to haptic settings. Say in like Payday 2, I have the M60. My phone was like, you know, going wild at the M60. As long as you turn the music off, you know, explosions and guns and sound effects all will trigger nicely and more or less correctly if without any precision because there's no spatial information on it, just sort of volume and tone. Within those limitations, it works pretty well and can still be kind of fun. But it is what it is, and I don't consider it to be a killer feature for most of the stuff. Those are my thoughts on the audio to haptic. It's nice to have, and you might actually find it pretty good for a couple of games that you've spent the time to tweak. I haven't, but you might. It's a nice feature to have there. I'll say that for sure. It's a nice backup. I really want to use my haptic gear, but this game just doesn't support it. You'll always get at least some level of support. Or even if you're maybe watching a movie or something like that, I want some kind of rumble mechanic. It does do that. I tend not to consume that kind of media in VR myself. So that's really all I have to say about the audio haptic. I don't use it, but I see its value, and you might use it. You might like it. You might be like, yo, this is super cool for watching loud BC movies. You know, okay, I actually never even thought of that until this exact video. So, I don't know, maybe it's pretty cool. Maybe it's worth checking out. But it's not really what I'm going to cover. I'm just talking about video games and that kind of support. And as far as that goes, I think it's pretty great. Okay, this video is a long time coming. Such a long time. So much stuff kept happening that kept me from making it. But finally, my bHaptics review is out and done, and you've just watched it. Thank you very much. So I hope you liked it, and I hope I conveyed all my sort of thoughts about this equipment. Because there's some of it I pretty much endorse across the board. The vest. One of those two vests. I think you're going to love it. I'm pretty sure that you're going to love the arms. I'm not 100%, but I'm like 85, 87. I'm 87% sure that you're going to love the arms. I can't guarantee it though, but I'm very confident. The TactVisor, I still like it, but I do consider it kind of a weak offering and my least favorite, but I still like it. I'm not really sure if I recommend it or not, unless you're just a haptics nerd. I think haptics nerds are going to like it, but I think a lot of gamers would find themselves a little bit disappointed with it. And it's game support. Game support is kind of spotty with it. Even on the experiences page, there's a couple of false positives there where it says it supports the game. The game will support the TactVisor, but they don't. Not too many, but it is an irritant. And don't expect the same level of support you have for the vest and arms. It's much less common. So take that into account also when we're talking about the TactVisor, is that its game support is considerably less. It's still pretty good. It's still pretty good. And a lot of the main ones where you'd want to get head haptic feedback, it should support. You know, after the fall, it doesn't come up often, but it does support it. Contractors or a game like that where you're getting headshotted a whole bunch, I'll suggest you get good. But if you can't, then haptic feedback on the heads actually can be pretty cool, and I believe it does work. And there's a couple other games I was playing today in the background. All the games I'm playing in the background did have support for the facial interface. So all this B-roll back here, all of those supported everything. So keep that in mind though, that not everything does support the TactVisor as well as the vest and arms. So what can I say? All in all, at the end of the day, I'm a huge fan of bHaptics and the stuff they've created. I really like them. I almost never... I don't think I've ever actually not wanted to put them on since I've got them. Every time I play a game, I'm like, is this an excuse for me to wear my vest? And I think if after like 6 or more months it's been since I've got these, and I still absolutely love them, and I'm still always excited to put them on every time. I think that is about the best endorsement I can give of these, is that the shine hasn't worn off. I'm still really excited to put them on, to the point where if a game does not have support for bHaptics, I'm kind of spoiled and I don't really want to play it as much because I can't gear up. I want to put on my gear. I want that part of the virtual reality to be there, and I find it very disappointing when it's not. And I think if you do also find yourself in love with this sort of haptic gear, that's going to be a problem you have to put up with too now. So once you're spoiled by having this extra dimension it sucks to go back to games that don't have it. Still, I mean, disappointment's part of life, but I don't think you will be disappointed by bHaptics. Even probably not the TactVisor, even though I consider it the weakest and don't necessarily just endorse it across. bHaptics gear, I really like it. Absolutely. Yep, this is definitely a purchase of mine that I'm very happy I made, even though it was quite expensive to get it in Canada. All this stuff was expensive in Canada. If you live in a better country, good for you. But even so, I think certainly the vest and arms, I think for sure you will enjoy. All right, I think that's it. I think that's all I can think to say about it. I've been going on. This is quite a long video. There's a lot to cover. I think I covered everything, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you find it useful. So lads, lovelies, everyone in between, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.